On the 26th of March, 2026, something changed at the Strait of Hormuz. Not everything. Not a ceasefire. Not a full reopening. Something more specific and more revealing. Iran's foreign minister spoke on state television and made an announcement. 6 nations, China, Russia, India, Pakistan, Iraq, and Bangladesh, will be allowed to move their ships safely through the strait. Their vessels have been coordinating with Iranian authorities and will continue to receive safe passage. All other nations, particularly the United States, Israel, and their close allies, remain blocked. At the same time, Iran's parliament is reportedly drafting a bill that would charge any vessel passing through the strait a fee of $2 million per crossing. $2 million. Per ship. Per crossing. Let's be clear about what just happened. Iran did not open the strait. It divided the world into 2 shipping lanes, one for friendly nations, one that remains closed. And it is now considering turning that division into a revenue stream. For the 6 nations on the friendly list, this is significant relief. But it is not a full solution. China receives about 45% of its oil through the strait. Safe passage matters enormously for its factories, its export economy, and the consumer goods it ships to the world. India has 60 days of fuel reserves secured. Its government confirmed this publicly. 2 Indian ships have already passed through safely. India's diplomatic approach, staying out of the war, maintaining relationships on all sides, just paid a concrete dividend. Pakistan gets about 63% of its energy from Gulf countries. Its fuel situation was critical. Safe passage for Pakistani vessels changes the immediate pressure significantly. Bangladesh similarly depends on Qatar for most of its gas. The fact that Bangladeshi vessels are now on the safe passage list means that energy supply can resume moving, though the backlog of delayed shipments will take weeks to clear. Iraq was already suffering. It shut down its largest oil field in early March because tankers could not leave. With safe passage restored, those exports can begin moving again. And for Russia, this is strategic confirmation that the alliance it has been building with Iran is producing concrete results at a moment when it matters most. Now, the $2 million transit fee proposal. India's government pushed back immediately, calling it legally baseless under international law. Whether it passes or not, the proposal tells you something important. Iran is not just managing a crisis. It is building a new toll system for the world's most important waterway. The Strait of Hormuz has been free to navigate under international convention for decades. That assumption may not survive this war, regardless of how the war ends. For businesses, which we covered in Part A of this episode, the message is, the 6-nation safe passage is good news for supply chains touching those countries. But it also confirms that the world has formally split into friendly and enemy shipping lanes. Every logistics decision now carries a geopolitical dimension. For NGOs, which is what the rest of this episode is about, the message is the same one we have been tracking all season. The world is dividing itself into blocks. And every organization that depends on cross-border funding, cross-border partnerships, or cross-border operations needs to understand which block their funders and governments are standing in. Because the funding floor, which was already moving, just moved again. I am Arman Akbary Khan. This is the Trifecta. And this is the survival map for NGOs in 2026. Let me give you one number. $54 billion. That is the amount of international aid cut by the United States government in January 2026. In one decision, overnight, thousands of organizations across Asia, Africa, and Latin America lost funding with no warning. Some closed within weeks. Others are running on emergency reserves. Most are now trying to rebuild funding models that took years to build, in months. Now add the context we have been building across this series. The Western alliance is fracturing. U.S. and European foreign policies are now running in 2 separate directions. The organizations that built their funding entirely on Western donors, government aid agencies, large Western foundations, are sitting on a model that assumed those donors would remain stable aligned, and growing. That assumption is broken. But here is what most NGOs are missing while they look at the problem. At the exact moment Western funding is pulling back, a different pool of capital is moving forward. BRICS-aligned institutions, the New Development Bank, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, Gulf humanitarian funds, Chinese aid agencies, are expanding into the spaces Western donors just left. This is not replacement funding. It comes with different conditions, different priorities, and different politics. But it is real, and it is growing. The NGOs that understand both funding ecosystems and can navigate both are the ones that will still be operating in 2027. Most NGOs know the United Nations funds their work. Very few understand who controls the United Nations and how fast that control is shifting. Here is what happened in July 2025. BRICS adopted its strongest ever position on reforming the United Nations Security Council. The formal statement called for a fundamental transformation of the international order, saying directly that the current system no longer reflects the realities of the world in the 21st century. 3 BRICS member countries, India, Brazil, and South Africa, are actively campaigning for permanent seats on the Security Council. All 3 have the full backing of the bloc. This matters because the Security Council controls the budget and mandate priorities of many of the United Nations programs that fund NGO work. There is a second part to this. BRICS has a formal entry requirement for new members. To join, a country must officially support Security Council reform and commit to not imposing unilateral sanctions on other countries. This is not just a membership rule. It is a political test. The bloc is deliberately building a reform voting group inside the United Nations system. In March 2026, for the first time, BRICS issued a joint statement condemning the United States strikes on Iran. That was the first time the bloc has spoken as one voice on a live military conflict. It signals something important for NGOs who have been watching from the sidelines. The institution that funds your programs, the United Nations, is now under coordinated political pressure from a bloc representing 3.3 billion people. The funding priorities of the United Nations are going to shift. Not overnight, but they are shifting. The organizations that adapt their language, their priorities, and their relationships now will be ahead of the funding cycle. Those that do not will find their Western written grant proposals increasingly out of step with where the money is going. Here is the most important thing I can tell you about NGO funding in 2026. One donor cut can kill you. If more than 40% of your income comes from a single source, that is not a funding model. That is a dependency. The goal of the next 12 months is to reach 5 to 7 active funding streams across both the Western and BRICS-aligned ecosystems. Here is the portfolio structure to get there. Stream 1, 50% from regional and small grants. These are your fastest wins. Lower competition. Local relevance. Funders that understand your context without needing a 20-page impact framework. The Africa-based NGO funding tracker runs daily email alerts of new small grants. The Asia Foundation gives directly to registered organizations in the region. The Inter-American Foundation genuinely funds grassroots work in Latin America. 4 small grants at the United Nations level. The United Nations Development Programme Small Grants Program, the United Nations Children's Fund Innovation Fund, and the United Nations Women Community Grants are all accessible for smaller organizations. Stream 2, 30% from foundations. Foundations have less bureaucracy than government donors and longer time horizons. The Echoing Green Global Fellowship, the Skoll Foundation, and Ashoka all fund social organizations worldwide. The MasterCard Foundation focuses on Africa and Asia youth livelihoods. The Ford Foundation funds justice work in the Global South. The Draper Richards Kaplan Foundation provides up to $300,000 for early-stage social organizations. Stream 3, 20% from earned income. This is the stream most NGOs ignore until a crisis forces them to build it. Selling training programs to local businesses, offering SOP templates and systems to smaller organizations, providing community consulting. These are real income models that dozens of small organizations are already running. Earned income is the only stream that does not depend on a donor's political priorities, a government's budget cycle, or an alliance's foreign policy. Build it before you need it. Funding is not global. It is regional. Here is where to look based on where you work. If you work in Asia, Japan's development agency, known as JITSA, runs small community development grants up to $50,000 specifically for local partnerships. Korea's equivalent agency does the same for livelihoods and innovation. Germany's development agency runs small grants in Indonesia, Vietnam, and the Philippines. Australia's Foreign Affairs Department has a direct local funding program for non-government organizations, the NGO Cooperation Program, that funds pilots. For raising money from your community, the Give.Asia platform serves all of Southeast Asia. Kitabisa serves Indonesia specifically with transparent public reporting. Global Sedekah connects Islamic social finance across the region. If you work in Africa, the MasterCard Young Africa makes innovation program. The African NGOs monthly funding tracker. This is a free email list worth subscribing to today. Diaspora funding. Global Giving Africa campaigns connect African organizations to international donors with a credibility verification layer. Community fundraising. Akbary in South Africa, Mchanga in Kenya through mobile money, Yensamubi for verified African organizations across the continent. If you work in Latin America, the Inter-American Foundation remains one of the most genuine funders of grassroots work on the continent. Avina, the Swiss foundation, funds social organizations across the region. European Union small grants are available through local embassies. This is widely underused. Community fundraising. IDAME is the largest crowdfunding platform across Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, and Mexico. Vaquinha for Brazil-specific campaigns. Apoia.se for recurring monthly support in Brazil. Now, the BRICS-aligned funding sources most organizations are not using yet. Chinese aid agencies fund infrastructure-adjacent programs across Asia and Africa. If your program connects to infrastructure development, agriculture, or energy access, there may be funding available that your organization has never explored. Gulf humanitarian funds from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates are substantial and active. For organizations working in Muslim-majority communities on humanitarian or community development, this is an underused source. The African Development Bank has a civil society fund. The New Development Bank has community grants. Both are growing. The key difference from Western donors: BRICS-aligned funders want tangible outputs and government partnerships. They are less focused on rights frameworks and more focused on what gets built. Adjust your proposal language accordingly, without compromising your mission. You do not need to rebuild your organization. You need to add new income streams while protecting what you already have. Here are 5 moves. Each takes less than a week to start. Together, they put your organization on a completely different footing. Move 1. Pick 3 funders from your region and apply to all 3 this month. Use the fundsforngos.org daily alert. It is free. Set it to your country and sector. You will receive a list of open calls every morning. Pick 3 that fit. Apply. Move 2. Build 1 earned income stream this quarter. $500 a month from training or consulting is your target. That is not a large number, but it is an income stream that no government, no donor, and no geopolitical shift can take away from you. Think about what your organization knows how to do and who would pay to learn it. Move 3. Check every donor before you apply. Search the donor's name plus the words controversy or investigation. Check their worker rights policies. A grant from the wrong donor can damage your credibility with every other donor you approach. Reputational risk travels faster than funding. Move 4. Build 1 local government or community leader partnership this quarter. A formal local relationship, even a simple memorandum of understanding, unlocks credibility with both Western funders who require local partners and BRICS-aligned funders who require government relationships. This one step opens two doors simultaneously. Move 5. Launch one crowdfunding campaign on your regional platform. Set a goal of $1,000. Not because you need the money, because the data on how your community responds to your work is worth more than the money. Who gives? Why do they give? What language resonates? That data shapes every grant proposal you write for the next 3 years. And here is your AI prompt. Pause here. Copy it. Fill in your brackets. Run it on Claude at claude.ai or Gemini at gemini.google.com. Both are free. AI prompt, NGO survival, funding resilience 2026. I run A, describe your organization, type, size, focus, country. Our current funding comes from list your main donors or funding types. Given the USAID funding cuts of January 2026, the growth of BRICS-aligned funding institutions, and the shifting priorities of United Nations bodies, tell me, 1. Which of our current funding sources are most at risk in the next 12 months and why? 2. Which 3 funders from our region should we apply to first, and what do they prioritize? 3. What earned income model is most realistic for an organization like ours? 4. How do we reframe our program language to appeal to both Western donors and BRICS-aligned funders at the same time, without losing our mission? Practical. Use current 2026 data. Simple language. Drop your organization type and your region in the comments. Tell me what you found. I read every one. The organizations that survive the next 3 years will not be the ones with the most funding today. They will be the ones that built the most resilient funding models while everyone else was panicking. In Part A of this episode, we gave businesses their survival map. In this episode, we gave NGOs theirs. And underneath both, underneath the funding shifts, the trade routes, the geopolitical blocks, there is a technology infrastructure being rebuilt in real time. The payment systems that move money between donors and programs. The communication networks that keep field operations connected. The financial rails that your organization depends on to receive and send money across borders. All of it is changing. And if you do not know what is changing, you will not understand why your international transfer took 11 days instead of 2. Or why a payment from a partner in one country suddenly triggered a compliance flag in another. That is Episode 7. The invisible infrastructure of the New World Order, and what it means for your operations. If this episode gave you a clearer picture of where the funding is going, share it with one NGO leader or development professional who needs it. And if you need a working toolkit to operate in exactly this environment, Stop Guessing is built for this. The Crisis Operations Playbook is live. Link in the description. Stay sharp, stay adaptable, and stop guessing.